Welcome to the last episode of the Animorphs Read Along broadcast. Today we are talking about book 54, The Beginning. Obviously this was a very controversial ending, but for my part I don't want to meander too much into the what ifs or the alternate scenarios or did Rachel really have to die. I've had almost 15 years to come to terms with this ending and I just want to deal with what is, because endings matter. Knowing how this book ends informs my reading of every single book that has preceded it. Knowing that Tobias's ongoing struggle with his humanity is ultimately a struggle he loses makes every Tobias book all the more poignant. Knowing that Jake and Cassie don't end up together makes the relationship all the more beautiful while they have it. And knowing that Rachel comes so far only to lose her life in the end makes every single Rachel book a treasure, except for book 37. Don't get me wrong, there are some things about the way this book was done that I wish had been executed better. But for me, I think the ending of this series is a huge part of what keeps me coming back. This isn't the kind of book that you put down and think, that was a nice series. This book stays with you. This ending leaves you with more questions than answers, at best with a feeling of melancholy, at worst with a feeling of despair. It's a challenging ending. As a young reader, the idea that a story could end this way, with everything feeling so wrong, was unfathomable to me. But I think for better or worse, this ending was true to the story that Applegate was telling. I don't know if it was just the full force of having read these books and devoted so much time to them over the past 6 months, or if it was because it was 2:30 in the morning, or if I was having a nervous breakdown, but when I started reading this book, I started crying on page 1, and by the end of chapter 4, I was hyperventilating. Rachel's last 4 chapters for me just felt like a love letter to the character. We get this last time that one of the Animorphs is going to tell you about the Yeerk invasion. I felt like we were sort of just reliving everything that's come before, all the good adventures, all the bad adventures. I don't think it's any coincidence that Rachel, the 2 animals she mentioned specifically, I've been a rat, I've been a dolphin. And I think those 2 morphs kind of represent the extremes of her experience. Obviously the rat being associated with David and all of that darkness, and the dolphin being associated with joy and freedom. Rachel pretty much knows that she's gonna die, and she admits in the first chapter or 2 that she's scared. She doesn't want to die. But when the moment finally comes and we have Rachel and Grizzly Morph facing these 5 other morphed Yeerks, Rachel says, I felt exalted. It was my moment. This was my place and my time and my own perfection. I was no longer afraid. Weird. If I'd had a mouth, I'd have smiled. Being a warrior has always felt like her destiny, and we get to see her sort of go out on this, almost like this spiritual high. We get Rachel demorphing from Grizzly Bear. She's in human morph, she's vulnerable, and she knows this is the end. I love you, I said to the screen. And oh God, how could so much regret and so much sweetness and so much sadness all be present in that single moment? I was already dead and missing my unlived life. I was already dead in Tobias's mourning. I think these last 4 Rachel chapters were really beautifully done. You couldn't really have asked for a more poignant, emotionally resonant way to kill off one of these characters. And even if the plot mechanism that got Rachel to this ending is maybe flawed, I think the symbolic and emotional stuff that drove her here is really powerful, and that this ending really does its best to honor her. The rest of the book is very plot dense. Viscert 1 has surrendered, the Yeerk invasion is over on Earth, and the Andalites and humans have come to terms. And I think in a lot of ways the rest of the book sort of functions as an epilogue. I guess when you have a 54 book series, your epilogue can be like 15 chapters long. It's possible that ending these books with the end of the war would have left us with a more triumphant feeling. But I think the scope of this series has always been interested in more than just how are we going to defeat the Yeerks. There's been a lot of talk in many previous books about what are we going to be after this. And so I think it was appropriate for Applegate to sort of show us, now what? Marco, Cassie, and Axe have all sort of found their way. Marco is applying his strategic and tactical skills, not to the war anymore, but now to his career and getting rich. Cassie is very happily protecting the Hork-Bajir as a species, and Axe is a celebrity prince back on the homeworld, and Jake is sort of predictably just stuck. Marco says Jake carried Tom and Rachel and those 17,000 Yeerks around his neck like the ancient mariner in his albatross. We finally get a Jake chapter when he's testifying at this trial, and he says, my life was divided into 3 parts, before, during, and after the war. And that middle section was so overwhelming, so big, so intense. It made the other 2 portions seem dim and dark and dull. We hit fast forward again picking up with Axe off in space looking for the blade ship. He only gets one chapter, and so does Tobias, and I'm just like, really? We already had to suffer them having half as many books as everyone else. Now they only get one chapter in the last book. But so this introduces this new plotline, some mysterious being who has kidnapped Axe. And we check back in with Jake, Marco, and Cassie. They're all in slightly different positions. Jake is doing better. He has a job. Cassie's still doing wonderfully. I think Cassie has always been the one who was going to be able to find her peace after this war because of her worldview and the way she approached all of their decisions. My biggest beef with these post-war chapters is actually with Marco. Marco's sort of always gotten his emotional depth from the way that he talks about his family, and we get absolutely zero mention of his parents in this entire book, which I thought was weird because I think out of all the Animorph parents, Marco's parents have really gotten the most time and attention and development. And it felt weird for him not even to have like a throwaway sentence of being like, oh yeah, my mom and dad are super happy. With Axe going missing, one of the Andalites from his crew comes to tell Jake, and when he hears that Axe is missing, my heart was pounding, my pulse was racing. I was a little embarrassed by my response, but this was Axe, one of us, one of mine. He still sort of slips right back into this mode. Jake is the leader of the Animorphs, and one of his people has gone missing, and he is freaking out. Jake is going to take a Yerk spacecraft and go investigate this. This is the perfect excuse for getting the gang back together. But when Jake goes to see Cassie, he sort of says like, no, don't come. Cassie, you're a one-woman army, but you're the soldier who has fought our war and moved on. That's good. It's not me though. Come on, Cassie, we both know this is a lifeline for me. Cassie's doing important work, and she actually has a shot at real happiness. And even though part of her wants to go, and she's definitely willing to go, I think she and Jake both know this is the right decision. Cassie should stay. It's kind of his last act of love towards her in a way. We finally get a Tobias chapter. I'm really bitter that we only get one Tobias chapter. I mean, this Tobias chapter is really nice, and it gives us a lot of insight into how Tobias is doing and what has he been doing. We get a nice Toby cameo. But after this chapter, even though Tobias goes with Marco and Jake on the crazy Save Axe suicide mission, he really falls into the background. I mean, he's barely mentioned in the following chapters, and that just seemed like a total waste to me. With Marco in tow, there's a new team that's going on this mission to look for Axe, and they're about to board the ship. So what do we call her? Marco wondered. She's beautiful, Tobias said. She's beautiful and dangerous and exciting. Marco laughed, realizing what we were thinking. She would love it. A scary, deadly, cool-looking Yerk ship on a doomed, suicidal, crazy mission that no one can ever know about? She would love it. So it was that we went aboard the Rachel. And then eventually, they find what they're looking for. They find the blade ship. And stuff gets really weird. I may mostly defend this ending, but it was really weird. The face that belonged to our friend Axe split wide open across the bottom and revealed a new formed mouth full of red-rimmed teeth. So they've encountered this new enemy that we know almost nothing about. We just know something really weird is going on. And the book ends with, there was a dangerous smile on Jake's face. Rachel's smile. Full emergency power to the engines, Jake said. Ram the blade ship. There are so many ways that this ending is dissatisfying. It leaves 1,000 loose threads. It kills one of our characters kind of unnecessarily. It leaves relationships destroyed and broken. And it ends on like the most ridiculous cliffhanger of all time. But for me, for whatever reason, after this 62-book sprawl full of ghostwriters and amazing adventures and less amazing adventures, darkness and happiness, this was the perfect ending. It leaves me feeling confused and conflicted, and I think that's kind of the point. And I'm really okay with the fact that this ends in the middle of another crazy suicidal Animorphs mission. So without further ado, those are all my thoughts about Animorphs number 54 at the beginning. I'm probably going to post like a retrospective video in the next week or two with my final thoughts. But for all intents and purposes, this has been the last episode of the Animorphs Read Along broadcast. Farewell!